Welcome to Removiecapt. Today I will show you a sci-fi thriller film from 2007 titled Time Crimes. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins somewhere in rural Spain. A middle-aged man named Hector leaves the hardware store to bring home a table he bought for his wife, Clara. Upon his arrival, he finds out that the things he bought had fallen out of the car, so he calls Clara for help, but she wouldn't answer. When Hector reaches the yard, he shows Clara the table and tells her that he'll go upstairs to take a nap. He tosses and turns on the bed, but couldn't fall asleep, so he decides to use the binoculars to look at the surroundings. Suddenly, Hector hears the phone ringing and goes downstairs to answer the call. However, the person on the other line wouldn't speak, so he drops the call. When he dials the number, he hears an automated message saying it's a restricted terminal. Hector accidentally drops the phone after being startled by the sound of the door when Clara enters the room. He tells her that the phone rang, although nobody has their phone number yet. As they start fooling around on the couch, Hector notices that he hasn't dropped the call, so he puts the cordless handset back on its base. A while later, Clara finishes assembling the new table, but Hector asserts that she'll never get it through the door. While relaxing on a beach chair, Hector uses the binoculars to look around the vicinity. Clara asks him to buy roast chicken for dinner, but Hector refuses to leave the house again. Hector suddenly notices someone moving in the bushes, so he tells Clara that she doesn't see anyone when she looks through the binoculars. When Clara goes back inside, Hector looks at the surrounding areas and notices a woman standing by a tree, removing her white shirt. When Clara gets back, she tells him that the table wouldn't fit, so she'll have to go out to buy roast chicken. After Clara drives away, Hector decides to leave the house to look for the woman. On the road, Hector notices a bicycle and an overturned garbage bin. As he goes further into the woods, he finds the woman unconscious and undressed. When Hector inspects her closely, someone emerges out of nowhere and stabs him in the arm with a scissor. Hector quickly runs away and hides behind a tree. When he takes a peek, Hector sees a man with a bandaged head and wearing a tattered jacket, taunting him by pretending to use binoculars to look back at him. Hector runs away and comes across a fence, so he climbs over it, but he passes out after falling on the ground. When he wakes up, he knocks on the house nearby to ask for help. Although Hector can hear the radio inside, no one responds, so he breaks a window and enters the house. As he wanders around, he ends up in a clinic where he finds a first aid kit. After bandaging his arm, he walks into a laboratory and finds a walkie-talkie, so he tries to contact a person on the other end. When he hears a man respond, Hector discloses that he broke into the house because he was running from a man trying to kill him. As Hector explains what happened, he is suddenly startled. Later, the man asks Hector if the person chasing him was wearing a pink bandage. The man notes that he had just seen the assailant jump across the fence through the surveillance cameras. The man tries calling the police, but he couldn't get an outside line, so he tells Hector to come over because it's much safer where he is. The man then discloses that he's in a silo at the edge of the property. The man warns him that the assailant is getting closer, so Hector quickly walks out of the house and follows the man's instructions to get to the silo. But he runs out of breath before he could reach the silo, so he tells the man to turn off the lights on the path to avoid being seen. When he gets inside, the man assures Hector that he is safe. Hector asks the man about the strange machinery, but he wouldn't answer. The man, who appears to be a scientist, discloses that there are no locks inside the doors, so he tells Hector to hide inside a large tank filled with white liquid. The scientist notes that he'll get inside with Hector after lowering the hatch. When the bandaged assailant appears by the window, Hector decides to go inside, but the scientist wouldn't go in with him as the hatch closed. After Hector is submerged in the liquid, the machine emits a flash of light and raises the hatch. When Hector gets out of the tank, he is baffled to see the daylight outside the window when only seconds have passed from his perspective. Hector gets even more puzzled when the man doesn't seem to recognize him. Using the binoculars, Hector checks out his backyard and sees himself arriving from the store. In his confusion, he drops to the ground and takes off the binoculars. After looking at the house through Hector's binoculars, the scientist tells Hector that he just traveled in time. Hector walks toward his house, saying he will call the police, but the scientist stops him and points out he's already there. The scientist informs him that the date is September 16, but Hector notes that he got inside the tank on the night of that same date. The scientist figures out that he only went back in time for a few hours. Hector still can't believe that the other man in his house is also him, so the scientist explains in a doodle that he became Hector too when he traveled an hour and a half into the past. The scientist tells him that he'll go back to the silo and reconfigure the time machine before Hector 1 arrives. He then asks Hector 2 not to tell anyone that he used the machine because he wasn't even supposed to be at the lab. After the scientist leaves, Hector calls his house and hears his own voice, so he doesn't say a word. When the scientist hears the phone ringing, he goes back and finds out that Hector 2 called his home. He admonishes Hector 2 for making the call, but he calms down when he learns Hector remembers answering the same phone call before entering the tank. When the scientist finally leaves, Hector 2 grabs a key hanging on the wall and drives out of the complex, using a remote on the keys to open the gate. On the road, he comes across the woman he saw earlier that day riding a bicycle. He stops the car on the side. His head starts to bleed. Hector 2 takes the bandage off his arm and wraps it over his head. The bloodstains on the bandage instantly turn pink as it blends with liquid from the tank. Soon, Hector 2 realizes that he is the very same man he was running from earlier. Not long after, the woman arrives to see if Hector 2 needs help. The woman tries calling for an ambulance, but she couldn't get a signal on her cell phone. She tells Hector 2 that she's going to find a landline, but he stops her, saying he's starting to feel dizzy. When his bandage unfurls, the woman takes a scissor from her bag to trim it. Hector 2 grabs the scissor when the woman turns around to take her bicycle, but before she could leave, he stops her and asks her to help him with something. When the woman sets down her bike on the side of the road, Hector 2 notices a jacket by the garbage bin, so he picks it up and wears it. He then leads the woman deeper into the woods, promising to provide her with an explanation later. Soon, Hector 2 sees Hector 1 on the beach chair, looking through his binoculars, but the woman runs away. Hector 2 eventually finds the woman hiding behind the bushes, so he sneaks up on her and threatens her with the scissors. He then takes her to the spot where he saw her earlier and tells her to take off her shirt. While observing Hector 1, he apologizes to the woman and assures her that he wouldn't hurt her. Afterward, Hector 2 tells the woman to hide behind the rocks and take off her pants. When he asks the woman to hand over the pants to him, she kicks him in the head while he's distracted and runs away. Hector 2 soon catches up to her, but they both fall downhill, knocking her unconscious. Hector 2 carries the woman back to the place where he found her undressed earlier. After stripping off her clothes and her shoes, Hector 2 hides behind a tree and waits for Hector 1 to approach the woman. As Hector 1 walks toward the woman, Hector 2 sneaks up behind him and stabs him with the scissors. As Hector 1 hides from him, Hector 2 recreates the movements he saw earlier to taunt himself. He does it several times until he sees Hector 1 running away. Hector 2 suddenly hears the woman screaming, so he runs back to the place he left her, but the only thing he finds there is the woman's pendant. While looking for the woman, Hector 2 reaches the backyard of his house, but he has to break through the fence to get in. He stares upon hearing the radio and the loud thud, but someone throws the table on him on his way up. Hector 2 gets back on. He hears someone running, so he goes back inside. Breaking through the door, he finds the woman climbing on the rooftop, so he grabs the woman by the sneakers and pulls her down, causing her to fall to her death. When Hector 2 sees the body on the ground, he's horrified to see that it was Clara. Hector 2 drops to the floor and grieves for his wife, but he gets the idea to contact the scientist with a walkie-talkie after hearing the sound of thunder. When he turns it on, he hears Hector 1 asking the scientist about the rumbling noise outside. He recalls that Hector 1 put down the walkie-talkie for a brief moment in the lab, so he uses the opportunity to tell the scientist that he was the man wearing the pink bandage. Hector 2 then instructs the scientist to come up with something to get Hector 1 to the silo, while Hector 2 prepares to pursue him. Soon, Hector 2 gets inside his car and enters the complex by ramming through the gates. As the scientist convinces Hector 1 to get inside the tank, Hector 2 peeks through the window to scare him. After sending Hector 1 back in time, the scientist comes out of the silo and heads to the house, telling Hector 2 that he needs to be examined because he's the first vertebrate to travel back in time. However, Hector 2 goes inside the silo and tells the scientist that he must go back in the tank because something went wrong. The scientist refuses, so Hector 2 threatens to destroy everything in the silo. Before going back inside, the scientist takes a device from his pocket and throws it on the grass. After Hector 2 hits him on the shoulder with a crowbar, the scientist confesses the cylinder was a battery and he threw it outside. Hector 2 removes his bandage and hands the scientist a flashlight, prompting him to look for the battery. Hector 2 tells the scientist that he needs a head start on the other two Hectors, but the scientist notes that he will only have up to 40 seconds because he materialized in the tank just moments after the scientist turned the machine on. The scientist further warns Hector 2 that he could cause a chain reaction beyond his control because there will be 3 versions of him. Hector 2 promises not to interfere and assures the scientist that his plan wouldn't affect what he did previously. Hector 2 suddenly realizes that the scientist had thrown away the battery even before he expressed his intention to use the machine again. He deduces that the scientist knew that he'd make another attempt to go back in time, so Hector 2 hits the scientist with a crowbar, asking him how he already knew. The scientist divulges that another one appeared in the tank about 30 seconds before him and instructed him to act surprised upon seeing Hector 2. While preparing for the arrival of Hector 1, the third one contacted him on the walkie-talkie, warning him that people will find out what they did. Hector 3 outlined everything that would happen and told the scientist to stop Hector 2 from going back to the tank. The scientist points out that Hector 2 will be the third one if he goes into the tank, and he couldn't stop him, no matter what he says. He further notes that the third version already told him that he failed to fix the problem, so Hector 2 drops his walkie-talkie on the ground so he couldn't contact the scientist when he goes back in time. When they shine the light on the walkie-talkie, they find the battery beside it. Before they could go back into the silo, they hear sirens blaring in the distance and rain starts pouring. As soon as the scientist turns the machine on, he hears a knock from the tank. When the confused scientist raises the hatch, he sees Hector 3 emerge to tell him that the machine works. Hector 3 asks the scientist to help him get rid of the other two versions of him after threatening to divulge that the scientist turned the machine on without authorization. He tells the scientist that Hector 2 is about to emerge from the tank, so he hides behind a cabinet until the second one leaves. Hector 3 instructs the scientist to follow Hector 2 to calm him down and rides a golf cart out of the complex. When he finds out that the gate is closed, he goes back to the house and asks the scientist for a remote for the gate. But he tells him that he couldn't take the one for the white car, so the scientist lets him use a red truck hidden in the garage. After Hector 2 drives away, Hector 3 follows him from a distance, barely making it out of the gate. Hector 3 waits for the woman on the bicycle to arrive before crashing the red van into the white car. After ramming the white car, he loses control of the van and runs it off the road. When he opens the door, Hector 3 falls out of the vehicle, along with some equipment from the lab. As Hector 3 looks at the items, the first thing he notices is the walkie-talkie. Hector 3 immediately contacts the scientist to tell him that people will find out what they did because he failed to solve his problem. Hector 3 observes the woman walking around the woods months. By that time, he wouldn't be there to see how it works. Hector 3 tells him to stop Hector 2 from going inside the tank at all costs if he wants to keep his job. He tells the scientist to stop Hector 2 from going back in time, not because he believes he could stop him, but because he knows that Hector 2 would give him a good beating. Hector 3 gets rid of the walkie-talkie and shows himself to the woman, causing her to scream. Elsewhere, Hector 2 is startled upon hearing the woman's voice echoing through the forest. Hector 3 tells the woman that they're running from the same person, noting that the assailant's face is bandaged. He notes that the bandaged man wouldn't look for them at their current location, so he tells the woman to sit beside him and wait. Exhausted from his ordeal, Hector 3 falls asleep. Hours later, the woman wakes him up and tells her that there's a house nearby. The woman leads Hector 3 to his own house, but he refuses to go in, so she persuades him and helps him get inside. Upon reaching the house, the woman leaves him in the kitchen so she could look around. While waiting for the woman to return, Clara arrives and sees the bruises on his face. Clara notes that the man with a bandaged head is outside, so she ran to the house to hide. She further discloses that she also heard someone inside their home, so she called the police. When they hear the bandaged man's voice in the house, Hector 3 takes Clara outside and sets up a ladder by the roof. To keep her safe, Hector 3 tells Clara to hide inside the utility room until he comes back. Hector 3 climbs up the ladder and gets inside the room he went to earlier when he was looking for the woman. Downstairs, Hector 2 hears a loud thud coming from the room when the window slides down. After putting the window back up, Hector walks toward the door, but a table is blocking his way. In the other room, the woman gestures that the bandaged man is downstairs. Upon hearing Hector 2 approaching from the stairs, Hector 3 throws the table in his direction, sending him back down. Hector 3 tells the woman she has to hide from the bandaged man because he saw her from afar and went crazy. He stresses that she has to fool him, so he puts Clara's coat on her and cuts her hair. After instructing the woman to run to the attic, Hector 3 goes back to his wife and leads her to the backyard. Without any explanation, Hector 3 puts his wife on a chair and sits beside her. When they hear the woman scream, he prevents Clara from getting up, telling her to just relax. After hearing the thunder roar, he throws the scissor away and says they still have some time before it starts raining. Moments later, Hector 2 drives away in his car to go back to the same loop. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.